For more insights, I'd like to bring in our panel. Ivan Eland is Independent Institute Senior Fellow, Stephen Yates, former Vice President Dick Cheney's National Security Advisor, and the current D.C. International Advisory CEO. Also, Betsy Woodruff is with us as well, the Daily Beast political reporter. Let me start with you, Stephen. A lot for President Trump to cover here. Of course, the bureaucracy marbled into the UN. It's interesting. Nikki Haley says the president sees potential with the UN. After 72 years, I would hope so. What's going to be the main goal, though, for the president tomorrow?
Well, I do believe that North Korea is going to top the agenda, but the thing that strikes me most is that this is deja vu all over again. UN reform, North Korea, Iran, and Middle East peace could just as easily have been the agenda for President Bush 15 years ago, going to the same place. So one of the biggest challenges the president faces is trying to turn this back around on the institution and say, what are you going to do about some of these issues? The United States has struggled with them. President Trump has come with some ideas, but clearly North Korea, I think, is going to dominate the discourse over the next couple of days.
And of course, Betsy, part of the problem is where Russia and China are, and the composition of the UN Security Council, where the 5 permanent members always have a veto, which probably has been the biggest impediment to anything ever happening there concrete.
Additionally, what's also a really important issue for the president and why this UN forum is so crucial to his efforts on North Korea is that we know a key part of the president's goal or the president's strategy for rolling back North Korea's nuclear program is sanctions. But sanctions don't work unless they're aggressively enforced. And the enforcement of those sanctions is going to be largely the responsibility of China and, to a lesser extent, Russia. So the fact that those two countries have their top diplomats all in one place with Trump, with Ambassador Haley, and with their teams over the next few days means this is a key moment when the president may be able to try to push China and Russia not just to sign on paper on UN sanctions, as they recently did, but actually to put some muscle behind enforcing those sanctions. That's one place where potentially this administration could make progress that prior administrations haven't, and it just remains to be seen if that happens.
You know, Ivan, it's interesting because hearing Nikki Haley speak most recently, she suggested the UN Security Council is out of options, although there was a plan put forth the Trump administration wanted to get through that was watered down. Since then, North Korea launched another missile. They've ignited the most powerful nuclear bomb to date. Is there a chance there's still a diplomatic solution with China and Russia coming on board?
No, I don't think there is. I think the horse is out of the barn, and we're probably going to have to go to deterrence. Now, the UN did, put more sanctions on North Korea, but Nikki Haley herself, I was surprised to hear her admit that they've gone about as far as they can in the Security Council, and I don't think you're going to see China and Russia step up and enforce these sanctions. We've had many instances of sanctions where they've pledged to enforce them and then they don't, and that's a great win for the countries that are not enforcing it because they get to pretend that they're enforcing it, but they're not. And I just don't see any way that this is going to that North Korea is going to give up its nuclear missiles or its nuclear weapons and any missiles that it develops because they believe it's in their security interest to keep them.
Stephen, let's go beyond North Korea for a moment and talk about the America First agenda of the Trump administration, how he plays that out tomorrow with respect to the rest of the world, and perhaps the responsibilities that nations have to themselves.
Right. Well, I think that's been a big underemphasized point, that this America First point was interpreted as isolationism or withdrawal, and it's really turning out to be more of a different kind of engagement. And to me, it's more about rebalancing. And so the message he was teasing today about the organization of the UN having to do more for itself and maybe right-size some of its missions and maybe look more carefully at the expenditures, especially when the U.S. gives such a large quantity of it, share more of the burden among more of its membership. That's frankly the way he's approached alliances generally. I don't necessarily favor his odds in pushing it because this is a calcified institution that has resisted this message for a long time, but he is unlike any president before him, and he may be able to push it in ways others have failed. In that respect, Betsy, President Trump able to get NATO to actually step up to the plate. In this particular case, though, we are seeing a runaway bureaucracy and spending. The budget is up 140%, staff up 100% since 2000, and they have been resistant to these sort of calls in the past.
Right, and it's interesting hearing the president and Ambassador Haley both sort of do a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, hint, hint message to the other member nations that they like to see them chipping in more, investing more, and that they're also going to be thinking about the UN in terms of the United States actually getting an increased bang for its buck. Of course, as has been highlighted, the U.S. is one of, if not the main funders of the United Nations. I think something that Trump, as a businessman, of course, is acutely aware of is the fact that when you fund something, you have extraordinary leverage over it. And so the question becomes, do the UN's member nations think that Trump and Ambassador Haley are sort of paper tigers when they make these threats, or these understated, perhaps between the lines threats that they've been making? Or do they actually take it seriously and change the way that they relate to this international body? And of course, it remains to be seen. It's something that I think folks will be keeping an eye on as UNGA unfolds over the coming days.
Ivan, I would hope they take it seriously, because there's not a lot of love in the United States for the United Nations, particularly when we are fronting 22% of the bill. So if they, we'll see what the speech sounds like, but we saw today already President Trump with his brief, just hello, if you will, to the UN. I think he put down some markers. He's going to be pretty tough on them tomorrow.
Yeah, I think he's right about this. He's a little less tough than he was in the campaign, where he said that the UN was the enemy of freedom and enemy of democracy. But I think he's still committed to reforming, and it certainly does need reform. And the United Nations has gone way past its collective security rationale when it was first put in the 1940s. They're into all sorts of different things. And I think, you can even look to like their peacekeeping mission in various countries. It's very corrupt, and it's run amok, and I think it does need to be reformed from top to bottom.
Yeah, the corruption stories have been absolutely horrific in certain parts of the world. Stephen, let me ask you, what would happen if we were to walk away from the United Nations? It's something we've toyed with for a very long period of time. They are an ineffective organization. I don't think they intimidate any of the world's bad actors. So what would happen?
Well, my sense is not very much would happen, but it's been seen as having some value to presidential strategy and U.S. strategy over many, many years. I've frankly toyed with the idea, why don't we move the UN to a different country so everyone could take their field trip somewhere else, and maybe the U.S. would have less of a bill to pay, and maybe there's a famous developer that could use that real estate in New York better. But that's kind of glib, partially meant. But really, this institution had one major national security issue put on its plate many decades ago, and that was the Korean Peninsula. And here we are today, still failing to really change the trajectory of things there. That's a pretty big failure for an institution.